What are some of the worst romance scams? Let's get right to it and find out. Starting with number 6. She thought he wouldn't remember it. Real estate agent Sophia Smith convinced a 90-year-old man with dementia that they were in a romantic relationship so she could swindle him out of more than $500,000. The award-winning realtor targeted widower Cornelius Connie Hoffmans after he donated to her nonprofit, ironically named Strong Arm Foundation. Although the charity advertised that it raised funds for underprivileged women and children, Smith took roughly 90% of the donations to cover her gambling habit. Apparently, she felt she was underprivileged at the blackjack tables. Despite being completely out of the closet, Smith convinced Hoffmans that she was in love with him. He thought they were dating, and Smith posted social media images where she referred to him as her best friend, which isn't the same thing as dating, and many friend-zoned guys can attest, but Connie was 90 and had mental problems, so he gets more room for confusion. But then, Smith used Hoffman's money to buy a home and RV and cover her gambling debts. My Vegas magazine named Smith a realtor with purpose in 2021, but the accomplished agent was hiding a dark secret. Smith had a problem with gambling and was in a cycle of gaining and losing large amounts of money. She was eventually arrested for exploiting Hoffman's kindness and mental state. In court, she admitted that her own problems made her greedy, and during her friendship with Hoffman's, it reached a new low. Smith also confessed to manipulating someone who cared about her for her own gain. Smith was eventually found guilty of theft, credit card fraud, and exploiting an older or vulnerable person. The disgraced real estate agent received a 6-month jail sentence and 5 years of probation. The court also ordered that she pay Hoffman's estate $300,000 in retribution. After a civil lawsuit, the widower's family took possession of Smith's home and RV. My Vegas really missed a chance for a follow-up article. The 2021 Realtor with Purpose has found a new purpose in 2022. Scamming. Number 5. Mr. Pretend. On the dating app Bumble, a swindler named Cieran McNamara conned at least 4 women out of $380,000. A woman, known only as Danielle, thought she had met a potential life partner on Bumble when she matched with Christian McNamara in September of 2021. He was a charming attorney who showered her with affection, and they spoke daily, exchanging hundreds of messages. During their video calls, McNamara not only made Danielle feel loved and beautiful, but he also got her to open up about her insecurities, which he would later use for exploitation. Once he earned her trust, the tone of his messages became more intimate, with her prospective partner sending revealing images and flirtatious innuendos. They also seemed to have identical problems. Danielle would talk about her bitter separation from an ex-partner, and Christian would reveal that he was going through something similar. Danielle's sister was also in the hospital at the time, so that and the fact that was ending a long-term relationship left her in a vulnerable position, and McNamara knew it. Then, in April of 2022, the money request started. At first, McNamara said he was mugged and needed cash to get the train home. So Danielle obliged, but what started with the occasional loan of $20 or $30 turned into a total of $4,050. And McNamara always had excuses for not being able to pay her back too, like not having a debit card or wanting to give her the cash in person. So Danielle made plans to meet up with him like 6 or 7 times, but he never showed. Danielle was so strapped for cash at that point that she canceled her daughter's birthday party and forced McNamara to sign an official IOU. So he responded by calling her crazy and threatening to commit her to a psychiatric hospital. She snapped and demanded he repay her, and it was at that point that she realized that the kind, charming person she had developed feelings for had been a complete lie. McNamara then sent rude and angry texts where he trashed her. Danielle reached out to law enforcement to report McNamara, but the police said what he'd didn't count as fraud. Danielle felt like the cops didn't really care about her situation since she lost a relatively small amount of money. However, McNamara's failure to repay the $4,050 meant Danielle couldn't afford to pay bills or buy essential things like food and toilet paper. McNamara wasn't the person Danielle thought he was. His real name was Cieran, and he used Christian as one of his aliases to contact women on the app. And Danielle was far from the only woman he targeted. McNamara had a list of multiple false identities that he used to charm women into sending him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Danielle tried to stop him from scamming others, but he still got at least 4 more victims after her. McNamara used the money to create the farce that he was living a life of luxury, which helped him further manipulate his victims. The police finally took the women's complaints seriously, and after investigating McNamara, arrested him in September of 2023. The detective who led the investigation believed the con artist was so swept up in conning these women that he couldn't separate reality from fantasy. While pretending to be a millionaire who owned properties throughout the UK, he was jobless and living out of a suitcase. Officers raided his storage unit and found $25,000 worth of designer goods, including a Burberry coat and scarf and Gucci sneakers. Further, McNamara, who showed no remorse for his actions, was charged with 4 counts of fraud by false representation. Number 4. On the rise. Liza Likens, who was a backup singer for Fleetwood Mac, lost $1 million to a Facebook romance scam. A guy who called himself Donald had messaged her. As time went on, she thought they had formed a genuine connection. Likens, who also did backing vocals for Stevie Nicks and Lisa Ronstadt, lost her husband Greg in 2020 after 23 years of marriage. She was close friends with Stevie Nicks and was her roommate for 10 years. Nicks was also Likens' maid of honor for her first marriage. Donald had reminded Likens of her late husband. He worked in Australia mining gold, and it took him 2.5 years to convince Likens that he was in love with her. And she fell deeply in love with Donald, who said he would move to her home in Las Vegas to be with her. But, like many scammers, he persuaded her to send him money once he gained her trust. Throughout their relationship, Likens sent Donald roughly $1 million. That money came from her life savings and selling her house, which she did for him. When she realized Donald didn't actually exist, it hit her so hard that she actually considered self-harm. Likens believes scammers targeted her after studying her Facebook profile and learning she was a lonely widow. So, Likens enlisted the help of Social Catfish, a company that helps track down scammers. The company featured Likens on its YouTube show and tracked Donald to a group of criminals in Nigeria. The fraudsters used photos of Raho Bornhorst, a German life coach, to scam Likens and hundreds of others. Bornhorst received hundreds of messages from women who thought they were in a relationship with him, and he had to explain to them that someone was using his pictures to scam. Likens is just one of many who lost money to the scam, as there was a 14% increase in the amount of money victims lost in 2023. That year, victims lost $4.6 billion to investment scams and $2.7 billion to imposter fraud. However, consumers lost the most funds to crypto and bank transfers. Since many people are too embarrassed to report scammers' actions to the authorities, these numbers were likely much higher. Number 3. The support group. In 2020, a woman, only identified as Lynn in an interview by Southwest News Service, met Derek in a Facebook group for grieving widows. He struck up a conversation with her, and they hit it off. She thought he was also a widower and felt relieved to have someone to talk about the pain she was going through. However, romance scammers instead conned Lynn, a British widow, out of $63,000 in life savings. Derek said he had recently moved from England to Dubai, where the mineral company he owned was based. The two bonded quickly over their trauma and shared the same sense of humor. After 4 months of getting to know each other, Derek needed a favor. There was an accident at the job site in Dubai, and 6 of his staff members were hurt. Derek said he was having cash flow issues and needed funds to cover the costs of his medical bills. He promised to pay Lynn interest for lending him the money, so she agreed. And with that, Derek started his scam, convincing her to cover his hotel bills and open crypto accounts so she could send him cash. When she told him she ran out of money, he said he'd have one of his business partners transfer the funds to her through his secretary. It would be in Bitcoin, which she would then need to send him so he could convert it to cash. Lynn, feeling like something was up, was too embarrassed to tell her family about the situation, but confided in a close friend who told her to be careful. Then, in January of 2021, police visited her home to tell her the truth. Fortunately, investigators tracked down the scammer and got Lynn's money back, which is nice, since that almost never happens. Lynn warned others not to fall for the same scam, as fraudsters know exactly what to say to make you feel special, especially if you're grieving the loss of a partner and your judgment is clouded. Number 2, the rigged relationship. A catfish conned a 75-year-old, identified only as Ava, out of almost $100,000. The UK's Channel 5 featured Ava's story after she gave away her inheritance and remortgaged her home. A stranger, who went by the name David West, contacted Ava on social media and complimented her pictures. She didn't see the harm in talking to West, a handsome engineer who lived in the US. When they started chatting, he said he lived on an oil rig. They always say they're on an oil rig in the middle of the sea, but would return to the US soon. The pair spoke daily, and the friendship quickly became a massive part of Ava's life. The pair had been talking for 6 months when West was finally supposed to head back to the US. But there was one problem. Airport security stopped him when he tried to board his flight, and he needed money to leave. So Ava sent him $1,270 to help him get home. Her mother recently passed away and left her house to Ava, so she didn't mind sending a little bit of cash. She attempted to send the funds through the post office, but employees told her not to do it because they thought it seemed suspicious. But instead of listening to their warnings, she just went and sent the money through her bank. When Ava's daughter-in-law found out about the situation, she tried to convince her that it was a scam. So Ava confronted West, who dismissed her concerns, saying that everyone is accused of being a scammer these days, and said he would pay her back as soon as possible. Since he gave her the affection she needed, his excuses always seemed legitimate, so Ava just continued on. But West always seemed to have terrible luck, like the time his daughter was in an accident and he couldn't afford to pay her medical bills. He always leaned on Ava for help, and when her money ran out, he convinced her to sell her house and car. West reminded her that it would all be worth it, as he was going to move to the UK to be with her and buy her a massive house. It wasn't until Ava's son, Stephen, uncovered the scam after rushing his mother to the hospital over a life-threatening infection that the thing came apart. He had been holding on to his mother's phone, which was going crazy while they were in the resuscitation room. Stephen saw some of the messages and realized that West was sending a large sum of money to his mother's house. The concerned son found out that West frequently sent Ava cash packages that she would pay into different bank accounts as part of a money laundering syndicate. Apparently, Ava was embarrassed about what she was doing and didn't want to tell anyone what was happening. Unfortunately, investigators couldn't get Ava's money back, as the cash was overseas and impossible to track. Now is a good time to remind you to try and keep an eye on anyone who's in an online relationship. These scams are clearly on the rise, and the best defense against it is to be surrounded by those who care. It can happen to anyone, regardless of wealth or fame, even friends of Stevie Nicks. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release to find out how this sugar baby tried to scam $1 million from her sugar daddy. Number 1. No money in Brazilian country music. Brazilian country music singer Wagner Oliveira stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from women he met on dating apps. Oliveira set up multiple dating app profiles under different names and occupations. He had multiple identities, such as an entrepreneur in the agricultural business or the father of 2 girls. Apparently, country music in Brazil doesn't pay all the bills. Oliveira targeted single mothers because, you know, if anyone has a ton of money, it's a single mom. And after contacting them on an app, then asking for their phone numbers so they could talk on WhatsApp. The singer would charm his victims by professing his love for them and sharing his dream of building a family, which seems to be romance scammer 101. And it worked too. The women fell hard for him, and once he got close, he would start asking them to lend him money. Oliveira told several lies about why he needed the money, such as waiting for cash from projects he had completed or money from real estate sales. His victims took out loans to get him the money he needed, with one woman sending him $1,720 and another handing over $4,350. Another victim claimed Oliveira used her personal information to borrow $2,430 in her name. Oliveira, ever the charmer, would get mean and aggressive when his victims refused to pay and used psychological tricks to get them to hand money over. He pressured a woman into financing a car, but pocketed the money she gave him and never made a payment for the vehicle. While he was shopping with one of his other victims, Oliveira convinced her to put roughly $1,400 on her card. He also used the same woman's information to finance a Fiat, which left left her in over $26,000 of debt. Oliveira further swindled over $203,000 out of at least 26 women. Police arrested him in December of 2023 while investigating him for embezzlement, coercion, and theft. If he's convicted, he faces 18 years in prison. He's like some weird reverse country singer that sings about stealing everything in a relationship rather than losing it.
Israeli Lynn Helena Halfin was charged with fraud against her husband, Richard Rappaport. The fraud allegations say she tried to steal $1 million from him during their brief marriage. Both Rappaport and Halfin refused to provide any information about their marriage, such as how they met. What little we know about their relationship has come from records and interviews. It's believed that Halfin met Rappaport at a benefit or social event in Tampa Bay, Florida. Why? They were first photographed together in February 2019 at a benefit for the Holocaust Museum in the Vinoy Renaissance Hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida. However, we don't know what led both of them to the event. However, investigators do know who Rappaport is and why a good-looking younger woman might want to attend benefits with him. Rappaport is the founder and owner of Panther Medical, a company that distributes medical devices and equipment to the Tampa Bay area. Panther Medical is a highly successful company. At its helm, Rappaport became a millionaire. For the past couple of decades, he supported benefits across Florida, especially causes related to his Jewish heritage, like the Holocaust Museum. Rappaport fell in love with his heritage when he visited Israel as a teenager. The nation had just established itself a few years before Rappaport traveled there. As a young Jewish teen, the first ever Jewish state was something he took immense pride in. When Rappaport started making money through Panther Medical, he donated to different Israeli charity funds. He gave to the Jewish National Fund and supported projects like playgrounds, the Alexander Muss High School, and a rehabilitation center for disabled children. His daughter Titus inherited his passion for Israel and also donated to Israeli national causes. He took Titus there when she was young, and she fell in love with the country as much as he did. Both Titus and her father make massive donations to these charitable organizations. Titus also sits on the board of directors for the Jewish National Fund. And since her father's disastrous marriage to Halfin, she's been at the forefront of media relations. Almost all of the statements on her father's history with Israel came from her. However, she spent most of her time going after Halfin, and not just legally. Titus has said publicly that she believes Halfin took advantage of her father's advanced age. She took the reins after her father failed to file charges against Halfin, who he wanted to give the benefit of the doubt, despite there being overwhelming evidence indicating she tried to steal from him. Titus quickly stepped in and saw the situation for what it was, a scam, though it took a while for her and the police to convince him that Halfin was scamming him. Rappaport was a man in love. He'd found a beautiful young woman from a country he dedicated his life to supporting. He wasn't about to let her go so easily. In the same legal document, he asked that Halfin not be deported back to her native Israel, even though she represented the nation he loves and a new life adventure. Halfin didn't feel the same way. The evidence of theft was overwhelming, and Rappaport couldn't deny that his beautiful young wife was trying to rob him blind. Halfin's first attempt at stealing from Rappaport took place inside a Tampa Amscot Bank branch. 3 months after their August wedding, Halfin walked into the bank building with a $1 million Wells Fargo cashier's check. After identifying herself, they invited Halfin to sit down with a bank teller. She explained that these were legitimate checks signed by her husband, who wanted to buy a $1 million yacht with the money. Halfin said Rappaport sent her, his wife, here on his behalf. However, the bank tellers had a protocol. The person whose name was on the check had to be present for them to authorize a cash out. They denied Halfin, and she went home empty-handed. Halfin walked back into the bank a few hours later with 3 new checks. Each one had Rappaport's name on them, along with a $333,000 sum of money. This time, she showed them her Israeli passport and her visa as identification. However, the bank tellers still refused to cash her checks. But before Halfin left, the tellers captured photos of the suspicious woman's passport, her visa, and the 3 checks. Then after Halfin left, the tellers decided to contact the authorities, who started investigating her. Meanwhile, Halfin was back at the drawing board. Her original plan, which was to write her husband's name on $1 million worth of checks, didn't work. She'd have to get more creative. But before she could come up with a better plan, Halfin got a call from Rappaport asking why she tried to cash the checks, followed by an even more important question: where are the checks? Halfin didn't know, but the police looked up Rappaport's contact information and asked him if he'd signed those checks. He, of course, said that was nonsense and didn't know what they were talking about, then called his wife of 4 months. His daughter, Titus, was there in the room with him as Halfin explained herself, though, as Titus recalls, Halfin spent most of the call berating Rappaport for not trusting her enough to handle his money. When he asked for his checks back, she only got angrier. The next day, the police interviewed Rappaport with Titus at his side. That's when he told them he thought Halfin was innocent and that he was giving her the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, investigators still found Halfin and interrogated her. They presented the Israeli national with photocopies of her passport, visa, and the checks collected by the bank as evidence. So Halfin told them the truth, her version of the truth. Halfin explained to the investigators that she had to forge the checks. Rappaport's family pressured him to withhold money from her because they thought she was a gold digger. So, to protect herself financially, she tried cashing a few checks. Halfin told police she shipped the checks to her sister in Israel when cashing them didn't work. The police explained that what she did was a crime, and Halfin agreed to ask her sister to send the checks back to Florida. The police decided Halfin's promise was good enough and left. However, it was far from over. Halfin had indeed sent the checks out of Florida, but not to her sister in Israel. In reality, the $333,000 checks were mailed to Orlando. Halfin knew trying to cash the checks herself wouldn't work. She'd have to hire a middleman who knew how to cash forged checks. The mystery person she hired was from Orlando. After Halfin mailed them the checks, they traveled to New Jersey and cashed the first check at a company called Check Pros. Then, 5 days later, they cashed a second check at the same company. However, they never got to cash the third check. Investigators had already been alerted of the first two and ordered Wells Fargo to freeze the third. When the news broke out, no one knew who the mystery person from Orlando was. Since they hadn't technically been charged with a crime, no one was at liberty to release their name, a name that remains a mystery to this day. The authorities gathered more evidence and met with Rappaport in December. Even if Rappaport wasn't willing to give her up, they wanted Halfin. They asked him if he'd heard anything from her lately about the checks. Rappaport told police that Halfin was meeting her sister in Boston to pick up the checks. Halfin told him that she had booked a flight to New York on December 15th, and once she returned to Tampa with the checks, everything would be resolved. The police, however, didn't believe the story. They kept questioning Rappaport, asking him if he believed the story. When the investigators poked him some more, Rappaport finally gave in. He admitted Halfin was probably conning him, a truth his daughter tried to convince him of on their wedding day and every day after. The investigators went looking for Halfin. As they dug, they discovered Halfin actually rescheduled her flight for December 16th, most likely hoping to throw off authorities trying to catch her. On the 16th, police investigators sent a squad down to Tampa Bay International Airport and arrested Halfin just before she got on the plane. They brought her into the station for questioning like normal, though there was one tiny problem. Halfin wasn't American. She was staying in the United States on a visa, but wasn't a citizen. So the police detained Halfin for 13 long months while they further investigated her scam, then offered her a plea deal. Halfin accepted the deal and was deported back to Israel as a condition of the plea agreement. You're probably wondering how Halfin got off so easily. She escaped prison time using one of the most bizarre defenses in court history. She blamed her criminal actions on her psychic. Throughout her time in Tampa, Halfin met with a young psychic named J.C. Wasso. In front of the judge, the court, and Rappaport, Halfin claimed Wasso put a spell on her. This spell, Halfin says, caused her to scam Rappaport, not greed. She says Wasso convinced her that stealing from Rappaport was the only option. Wasso also asked Halfin to give her the money and anything else she stole, including some of Rappaport's jewelry. The Florida state prosecutors recorded Halfin's testimony and went after Wasso. They arrested the self-proclaimed psychic and charged her with several crimes. The prosecutors charged Wasso with 7 different counts of grand theft, several counts of fraud, and 1 count of money laundering. They also compiled and submitted 800 pages of evidence to the court. Her attorney, Glenn Lansky, who's known for defending white-collar criminals, says the state refused to offer his client any plea bargains. He said they were throwing the whole deck at her. Whether or not that was a tarot card pun, we can't know for sure. Still, Florida prosecutors went after Wasso, intending to send her to prison for as long as possible. Since they had already deported Halfin, extraditing her to the U.S. wasn't easy. Lansky believes the prosecutors were scapegoating his client because they lost the actual perpetrator. He says that Halfin committed the crimes and admitted to lying over 50 times during a deposition. Nevertheless, Wasso will appear before a judge in the summer of 2022. She's up against a team of prosecutors on a mission to avenge one of Florida's wealthiest and most generous residents. The psychic's future isn't looking too bright, but she probably saw that coming, right?
Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section what you'd rather do if you could only pick one. Find potential dates only in real life or only use apps for dating.